Let me say how happy we are to see all of you, especially those for whom this is your first Shul of Bellaire experience, hopefully the first of many. And who better to make that case than the director and spiritual leader of the Shul. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the very warm, friendly, dynamic, wise, and witty Rabbi Yossi Zaklikofsky.
Thank you, Rhoda and Steve, for that very kind introduction. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for this historic evening, brought to you by the Shul of Bellaire in celebration of our 6th year of service to the community. So this woman was taking a walk along the shore of Galveston Island when she noticed a magic lamp sitting in the sand. She picked up the lantern, rubbed it, and sure enough, a genie came out and granted her 3 wishes. The delighted woman said, "My wishes are as follows. I want my husband to have eyes only for me. I want to be the only one in my husband's life. And I would like that when my husband gets up in the morning, I'm the first thing he reaches for, and he takes me with him wherever he goes." So the genie turned the woman into the iPhone 7. Look, I know how attached at the hip we all are, quite literally, to our devices these days. Nevertheless, I'd like to ask everyone to please be so kind and to shut down your phones for the duration of our program. It will make the experience that much more rewarding for you and those around you. Several years ago, an event was held at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., where they honored the memories of the some 150,000 Lithuanian Jews murdered during World War II. Among the speakers that day was one of the few survivors of the infamous Kovna ghetto, a woman by the name of Marcia Wolpe. Though barely 5 feet tall, when she stood at the podium, it was with the confidence and poise of a moral giant. Marcia Wolpe spoke of what life was like growing up in a vibrant Jewish community before the war. She spoke of the Torah scholars she saw walking the streets, of the joy and beauty she witnessed in her home every Shabbat. Then her story turned dark, very dark, as she described the German invasion of her town. How as a little girl, 12 years of age, she suppressed her screams as she watched in horror from a hiding place behind the trees in her backyard, as her parents were taken out and shot before her eyes. She spoke of the mass deportations and the mass executions. She described how she and her younger sister, Golda, were eventually discovered by the SS and were among the lucky ones to be crammed into the Kovna ghetto under the most barbaric and inhumane conditions. The pain and suffering were too immense for words. She went on to relate that after years of living in squalor and starvation, word spread that the Germans were losing the war and that the Russians were fast approaching. This, however, did not stop the Germans from committing their one last act of cruelty against the afflicted Jews of the Kovna ghetto, Marcia and her sister among them. They were marched to the shore of the North Sea, where they were shoved onto dilapidated and unseaworthy boats and cast out to sea. As the Nazis fled the scene, the decrepit boats began to sink, dragging their broken and bewildered passengers down with them. A British gunboat happened to be in the area and came rushing to the scene. The sailors tried plucking as many of the drowning Jews from the water as they could. Marcia spoke of how the screams and splashes of panic of that horrific night have not stopped echoing in her mind ever since. For it was there that her sister Golda, whom she had been clutching tightly, suddenly fell from her grasp, and despite her and the sailors' best efforts, could not be found. After all they had been through together, Marshall's last remaining family member lost her life in the cold and unforgiving waters of the North Sea. At that point, in telling her story, the floodgates opened and tears came streaming down Marcia Welpe's cheeks. The audience wept right along with her. But then she regained her composure, cleared her throat, and raised her chin proudly once again. As I stood shivering on the deck of that British gunboat, she said, with no tears left to cry, I made a vow. I vowed that I would not rest until I would avenge the blood of my sister, of my family, and of all the Jews of Kovna. And I have followed through on that vow. Indeed, I have dedicated the rest of my life to taking my revenge. Shall I tell you how? Marcia asked the crowd rhetorically. I'll tell you how. I became a Hebrew school teacher. That's how. I taught Jewish children Judaism. That's my revenge. My friends, throughout our history, the way that we, the Jewish people, have responded to atrocity and adversity is not by backing down and running away from who we are and what we are, but on the contrary, by doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on who and what we are. For all the darkness that others have sought to plunge the human condition into, we have sought to elevate the human condition by kindling light, and still more light. For as the nation charged with being a light unto all other nations, that is our mission and purpose in this world. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the purpose of the Shul of Bellaire, to kindle light, and more light in this community, to ignite people's souls, to warm their hearts, and illuminate their lives with the light of Judaism and the radiance of its eternal truths and traditions. You know, my friends, not a day goes by in which I don't thank God for the awesome privilege of serving as an ambassador of the Lubavitcher Rebbe of saintly memory, in carrying out this mission of light and illumination in the Bellaire area of Houston, Texas. In this regard, I feel doubly blessed in having a partner by my side whose boundless love, dedication, wisdom, and encouragement has been the real driving force behind the growth and success of this organization over these past 6 years. I am speaking, of course, of my better half, Mrs. Yossi Zaklikofsky. Let's give her a big hand. Both Yossi and I are grateful beyond words to be joined in our efforts by some of the warmest, friendliest, and kind-hearted and generous people one could ever hope to meet. I am talking about the people of this community, our friends and supporters, students and congregants, parents and teachers. It is your involvement and participation that is the lifeblood of this organization. I would like to specifically acknowledge our dear friends Alan and Luba Bigman, Ron and Melissa Jacobs, Gary Davis and family. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you. Thank you all so very much. I would like to conclude with one final thought. In just a little while, we're going to hear an up-close and personal account of the story of Anne Frank, as experienced by her childhood friend and stepsister, Eva Schloss. Those of you who read her famous diary may recall that in several entries, Anne describes this beautiful chestnut tree that stood next to the annex in which she and her family were hiding. She describes how, looking out from the only window of the attic that had not been blacked out to conceal their whereabouts, she would gaze and marvel at that tree. I look at the blue sky and the bare chestnut tree, on whose branches little raindrops shine, appearing like silver. As long as this exists, I cannot be unhappy, she writes. In many ways, the magnificent tree represented Anne Frank's longing for freedom, her appreciation for the beauty and goodness of the world despite the ugliness unfolding around her. That tree gave her hope and perhaps the inspiration to share the powerful words that would be immortalized as the ultimate dichotomy of innocence and purity versus evil and cruelty. Anne Frank's stately and majestic tree, as it turns out, had been one of the oldest chestnut trees in all of Amsterdam. Unfortunately, several years ago, it was discovered that the tree was diseased and had to be cut down, lest it fall and cause serious damage or injury. So a group of people took the sap of that tree and germinated it. And from it, they created hundreds of saplings. These saplings, consisting of the exact DNA of the original tree, were then given to schools and organizations all over the world to nurture and grow. Anne Frank's life, like 6 million others, including 1.5 million innocent children, was so senselessly and mercilessly cut short. But her tree, her legacy of hope, goodness, and dignity lives on. It has been transplanted within the hearts of millions, within the very consciousness of humanity. Golda Wolpe, another of those 1.5 million pure and innocent children, drowned at the banks of the North Sea. She too lives on. She lives on in the words of her sister Marcia, who declared, "I became a Hebrew school teacher because Marcia understood that if Am Yisrael lives on as an informed, educated, enlightened, and involved nation, then Golda lives on. She lives on within us all." My friends, when we come together for an evening such as this in a spirit of Jewish pride and solidarity, we are replanting. When we stand up tall for goodness and truth, we are replanting. When we build institutions of education and inspiration, we are replanting. When we join with others to pray, to study, to celebrate, and to grow, we are replanting. We are replanting those majestic trees of yesteryear. Within the Shul of Bellaire, you have a wonderful Jewish resource at your disposal. More than that, you have a Jewish family and the Jewish home whose doors are always open to you and to your loved ones, to come in, to get involved, and to feel connected at whatever level or pace suits you. In the words of our sages, just as our ancestors planted for us, we must plant for our children. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what this is all about. So thank you again for being a part of this historic evening.